Welcome back to this, already the final segment of today's Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. If you want to be starting something, you might want to be looking at this study here by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, uschamberfoundation.org, on enterprising states. Because this will tell you where you want to start that something. The study will tell you. Mark Schill, he's the lead author of that study. We're continuing our conversation with him. You know, this week we had elections around the country for initiatives and referendums around the country. I was wondering if you were watching any of those, because I'm sure you know they're going to have some bearing on future studies like this.
Yeah, I try to keep an eye on it. I think one of the things that we try to do with this study, too, though, is anchor on the long-term, the foundational, fundamental things and the long-term. Because one of the things we found is the trend in when you're thinking about economic development policy and practice and some of these initiatives in these states is that, it used to be economic development was all about what I call fast cars and big cigars style development, right? As we're recruiting these huge firms, we're giving away huge incentives to get the 500-person manufacturing plant in the region. Well, the trend we're seeing is this focus much more. Those things aren't necessarily going away, but a strong focus on building local and focusing on the entrepreneurship capacity within your region and transferring the knowledge there into the private sector and saying, let's create some companies based on what we know we're good at. And the other thing that we're finding that's driving that is businesses are saying to their local politicians and state politicians and educators that, wow, we're looking for a different type of worker now. We're looking for a higher level of skill or a different level of skill even. And that's focused, again, back bringing the education systems into the mix of what was traditionally economic development or a sales-based process. And so it's this big convergence. And so it's interesting. Politically, you get maybe hung up on the horse race of X number of jobs this month, we're up, we're down, we're up, we're down. But at the same time, you have to keep your eye on the ball of looking at the fundamentals within your state and how can you address those. But yet remembering that you may not see the fruit of that labor for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years.
Talk a little bit, I don't know if you saw, we had an initiative and referendum here, statewide constitutional amendment designed to curtail the ability of the state to raise taxes on property. And people were very excited about it. To me, it kind of reeked of Proposition 13, which I think, the Howard Jarvis legislation that I think came back to haunt that state because, I don't like any taxes, but at least property taxes tend to be transparent. Politicians have enough sense to know they can only go so far without killing one of the, geese that laid their golden eggs, which is new buildings and property. And it's far less nefarious than income taxes. And so I was kind of disappointed to see it pass. I wasn't surprised. Whenever they talk about lowering taxes, those things always pass in an initial referendum process. But strategically, I think it could do long-term harm for Texas, making income tax, which we don't have in this state, all of a sudden something they have to look at because of those limitations on property tax. Your thoughts?
Right. I think the bigger picture angle to that is sometimes those laws, well, they seem good at the time, limit long-term flexibility. And it's hard to know, like the Proposition 13 in California is a great example. It's hard to know. You can say now this might be best, or now the political conditions are such that we need to create this limit. But are you certain in 5, 10, or 15 years, again, looking down the line, that you may not need to adapt some of that policy later and creating that hard and fast, constitutional change could limit your ability to be nimble as a state when needed. And I think you're also right that high income tax states, the pressures on income tax politically. High property tax states, the pressures on property tax. But what I do find sometimes is on those property tax measures, I've seen a few that do get voted down on the angle of that's the local government's ability to decide their own future and to control what they do at the local level with schools, with keeping the streets clean, the nuts and bolts things. And that's almost, I think, a lot of times the level of government that people still have the most trust in, you know, and they see the most return for. Here's my bill, but I see what I get for that. And sometimes property tax, you're right, that's the most direct tie to local government and that level that people can see the most results from.
Yeah, I talked to a good friend of mine who I consider very politically savvy to see what his thoughts were on it. I told you my initial reaction, and I hate taxes. I love limiting government's ability to tax. But again, I worry about the ripple effect on this tax because among taxes, I think property tax are among the least harmful. I mean, I believe that. Income tax is so deceptive, and it's like a shell game. And I don't believe businesses pay taxes. Businesses are really only tax collectors. Just like when you buy something, you're paying the seller, the person you're making that transaction with, you're paying their income taxes as well. You and I both know that. And so this adds to this deception. But I asked him about that, and he said, well, with the possibility of it leading to income tax, and he goes, it would never happen with this legislature. We don't pass constitutional amendments with this legislature in mind. You pass amendments or vote down amendments with the potential behavior of all future legislatures in mind. And that's where, to me, it seemed like a very potentially harmful vote.
I agree completely. There's the issue of the current situation, but there's also what's the right policy to govern our state for the long term. And I think you're absolutely right. Even without regard to property tax, when you're talking about a thing like a constitutional measure, that has long-term implications. You have to keep that in mind, whether or not it makes sense.
Yep. All right, we got a couple of minutes left. I'm curious, what were some of the surprises you saw in your research?
Well, I think a couple would be the strong talent levels in the plains and some of these states that you may not see, and that's actually starting to occur in the Great Lakes states, where the narrative is probably fairly negative about the economy based on the last 20 or 30 years, maybe rightfully so, and the states were caught in the wash of what happened in manufacturing. But you start to look at the younger populations, you're seeing high levels of education, and people are looking at those places as opportunity starts to manifest. That's a great places to live that are fundamentally sound, and they're affordable. You can buy a home. You can move from someplace in the valley, Silicon Valley, where you may be a highly paid engineer, but if you're 35 or 40 and hope to buy a home, you can forget about it unless you've got some family money or you have access to a home that someone bought 20 or 30 years ago. But yet, there's a lot of nice neighborhoods, and whether it's a nice turning around urban neighborhood and with a little main street and a ring suburb of Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, or a suburban home. And I think that's one area where Texas has done well, is even though it's been one of the fastest growing states in the country, is maintaining the housing costs and making sure that it's a place where people can actually move to and live comfortably.
Yeah. When you look at the various states, we talked both in the last time you were on, and you just alluded to it, which state, we think of Michigan, I think, is one of these. What are some of the states that you think are trending in the most positive fashion when it comes to these six areas of economic indicators?
Yeah. The strongest one overall from our study is Utah. They've just done very well across the board. I think what's most interesting from a policy standpoint from them is they've dared to be who they are. They've avoided some of these high dollar incentive projects and said we're going to compete on cooperating, but yet it actually seems to be working. And I think that's one of the key themes that we can take away from looking at the differences in states, is that some of the fundamental things that may have been viewed as an anchor in the past could still have potential to be a foundation for growth in the future. And I think Michigan's a good example. There's still a fairly strong concentration of engineers in Michigan, or that acumen, or that know-how about how to build things, right, is still there. And those industries have changed, and the structures have changed, but yet if you have that knowledge and human capital still in your region, that's something you can capitalize on if you have the ability to shift gears. Yeah,
and then the Southeast looks like third world.
Yeah, the Southeast, I think the region as a whole probably doesn't do as well on some of those human capital measures. You're seeing some growth in manufacturing in the last 4 or 5 years in that region. But I would say that region as a whole is on a different trajectory. Like you mentioned, each region is a little bit on a different trajectory. The West or the Intermountain West is younger in its, I think, growth cycle. The Northeast is much older. Is that it's matured and it's just in a much different state. In the Southeast, that's a hard nut to crack. I think some of the metro areas are doing well. A place like Nashville, Charlotte, has seen some growth, but other parts, and even Atlanta, but other parts are maybe falling behind a little bit.
Mark Schill, he has been on the show before. Good job, and glad to have you on. USChamberFoundation.org. When you go there, look for that Enterprising States. It's pretty prominent on there, or just simply go /Enterprising States. Mark, thanks again for being with us.
I appreciate being here. Thanks for having me.
All right, tomorrow we're going to have much more for you. I do want to remind you the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter, and check out our sister website, usdatareview.com. Have a great day. Spend it wisely on this station.
You've been listening to The Price of Business with Kevin Price, a production of Salem Communications Houston. Be sure to tune in next time for more fabulous insight from Kevin Price. And remember, folks, get your politicians nayed or spewed.